Hey, Kerry Jr., the second host of On the Line here. And just like our last episode, we're getting you ready for Saturday, all right? U of M versus OSU, both undefeated. This is high stakes. And what better way to prepare for a game like this than to recount another historic high-stakes game? And what if I told you that this game took place during the last season the Wolverines won the national championship? Well, that's what Road to the Victors is all about. Hosted by Andrew Hammond, Road to the Victors takes you on a journey throughout the University of Michigan Wolverines' 1997 season. And the episode you're about to hear highlights the historic rivalry between Ohio State and University of Michigan. Check it out.
60 minutes. That's how long the Michigan Wolverines are away from playing in the Rose Bowl and a shot at the national championship. All they have to do is beat their most hated rival, the Ohio State Buckeyes. Welcome to episode 12 of Road to the Victors, the story of the 1997 Michigan Wolverines. I'm your host, Andrew Hammond, assistant sports editor at the Detroit Free Press. On this journey, we're taking you game by game, week by week, to give you the inside look at how the 1997 Michigan Wolverines captured their share of a national title. It is perhaps the most defining rivalry in college football. From a regional rivalry in the 40s, 50s, and most of the 60s, things changed in 1969. A Michigan victory over what many considered to be the greatest college football team of all time, a 10-year war was launched between Michigan, led by Bo Schembechler, and Ohio State, led by Woody Hayes. In a streak of 10 games, the coaches and their programs took the rivalry into the stratosphere. From 1969 to the final game in 1978, the Rose Bowl and/or a shot at a national title game was at stake. Even after the 10-year war ended, the fervor and passion of what is called the game remained alive. So did the stakes. Between 1969 and 1996, the winner of the Michigan-Ohio State game went on to play in the Rose Bowl 18 times, plus 2 other times when the teams were tied. A trip to Pasadena was once again on the line in the 1997 matchup inside Michigan Stadium. If you want the complete story of the 1997 Michigan Wolverines, the Free Press is publishing a commemorative book. Hail Yes, the story of the 1997 Michigan Wolverines can be purchased at um.pictorialbook.com. In the few years before 1997, it had been Ohio State with a shot at the Rose Bowl or even a national championship entering the rivalry game. Now it's Michigan with all the marbles to play for. By Ohio State standards at the time, the Buckeyes had a pretty good season, entering the game at 10-1. When we come back after the break, Mitch Albom of the Free Press joins the show to talk about the 1997 edition of Michigan and Ohio State. We are back with Road to the Victors, the story of the 1997 Michigan Wolverines. Michigan, Ohio State, the Rose Bowl, and a possible national championship on the line. You know we had to bring in the big guns for this episode. Mitch Albom, award-winning writer for the Free Press, joins us to talk about the 1997 Classic between Michigan and Ohio State. Mitch, thank you for joining the show. We really appreciate it.
Sure thing. Happy to do it.
I know it sounds cheesy, but when I was taking a look back at the game in preparation for the show, I instantly got chills because it's a rivalry game like this with stakes on the line, and in some ways, you just can't help get chills about this game when Michigan and Ohio State are playing for something big on the line. Is that how you feel about this rivalry when the two teams are playing and there's something important on the line, not only a Rose Bowl, but a possible national championship?
Well, yeah, there weren't a lot of years where the national championship was in play for Michigan during that time because they always seemed to be relegated to having to play. That was before the playoffs, so they were always relegated to playing a Pac-10 team in the Rose Bowl, which is what you got if you won the Big Ten. And so, the Pac-10 teams weren't the top ranked teams, and so the chances of them being able to win a national championship with their bowl game were always very slim. Now, going into that Ohio State game, they were undefeated, and they were also ranked number one. So they had the advantage at that point of saying, all we got to do is just keep holding on and keep winning, and we can win this thing. Whereas in years past, they might have been ranked number 4 or 5 or 6, and they were going to play a Pac-10 team that was ranked number 8. And so you don't have a chance. That's why they invented the playoff, but it didn't exist back then. So that particular Ohio State game, where they took them on it, and it was in Ann Arbor, if I remember correctly. That was a really big game, not only because it's always a really big game, but because they knew that if they won that against a team that, and you're going to have to correct me, I'm sure you have the data in front of you, but I think Ohio State was 10-0 or 10-1 or something coming into that game too. Weren't they ranked number 4 in the country?
Yeah, 10-1, ranked 4 in the country, and for the first time in 2 or 3 years, they aren't playing the Michigan-Ohio State game for Ohio State isn't a shot at a national championship. So kind of the shoe's on the other foot. But this game always has a big fight feel to it. And this game, literally, Charles Woodson and David Boston get into it on one of the first series or first plays of the game for Ohio State. It's almost like a hockey fight. There's punches being thrown, jerseys and arms are being tugged around. These days, most assuredly, a personal foul on both teams, and both players are probably ejected. Here in 1997, nothing is called, play on, and now it's one of the more iconic images of the rivalry. When you saw that moment and you saw those two going at it, was it something that you're just like, okay, this is game on. This is what we're talking about when it comes to Michigan and Ohio State playing for something as big as this?
You tend to see that happen twice a year if you follow Michigan football, as I obviously have for many, many years. The Michigan State game and the Ohio State game. Sadly, this year, we saw it writ large with the Michigan State game in the tunnel, and something that was not acceptable at all. But that kind of chippiness, that kind of, let's establish stuff early, was very typical of those games. The Michigan State game and the Ohio State game, and always early. I mean, it didn't. In fact, it almost always happened early, because that's when you're so charged up, you don't know what to do with yourself. And Charles Woodson, was not a huge guy, but he was a very tough player, and he was having an incredible season. And if I remember correctly, that game, after that fight, they basically went back and forth, and all they did was punt. I mean, they just nobody could gain enough to do anything on that. It wasn't an offensive game at all. But for the first 9 or 10 possessions, I would say I don't think anybody did anything. I don't think they scored anything. They just had a punt, which is kind of the toughness that both teams were exhibiting defensively. And as we know from that season, I'm sure you've talked about in years past, but that Michigan defense was one of the best I've ever seen. I mean, their average score, if I remember during the season, was kind of like 27-3 or 34-6 or 28-9. The single digit scoring that they had for a lot of the years. I mean, look, I'm pulling up a thing here now. They held Penn State to 8 points. They held Minnesota to 3 points. Michigan State to 7 points. Northwestern to 6 points. Indiana 0, Baylor 3. Even when they opened against Colorado, and Colorado was a ranked team, 3 points. So you weren't expecting the other team to score a lot that year with Michigan. And you weren't expecting Michigan to score a lot either. They didn't. That wasn't, one of the light them up offensive programs, but with Brian Griese at the helm, who I knew well, and knew in his career afterwards as well in the pros, he was that efficient drive down the field, keep things going quarterback, and in the end in that game, that kind of proved to be the difference.
For sure, for sure. And after a deadlock first quarter, Michigan gets on the board with a 1-yard touchdown from Anthony Thomas. After Michigan forces an Ohio State punt, Brent Bartholomew punts to Charles Woodson, and the rest is history. Here's the call from Frank Beckman and Jim Brandstatter of WJR and the Michigan Radio Network.
Brent Bartholomew has been Ohio State's MVP. He's averaging 48 yards a punt. He's had 1 for 55, 1 for 50, gets a low snap. No pressure, though, and he booms another one. Woodson back, grabs this one on his 23, races to his left, to the 25, splits 2 men, now to his left at the 40, 45, and there he goes! Charles Woodson down the sideline. He's gonna go all the way. Touchdown, Michigan! Shades of Desmond Howard!
As Frank Beckman put it, this is shades of Desmond Howard. Michigan's leading Heisman contender returns a punt for a touchdown versus Ohio State, essentially breaking the game open. I believe you're in the stadium that day. What are some of your memories from that punt?
Well, Charles Woodson was an explosive player. And, he was one of those rare guys that could do everything, and he did. He was a phenomenal defensive back. Obviously, he intercepted passes left, right, and center. But then anytime he came out on the offensive side, which wasn't obviously every play, so that sometimes they would put him out as a decoy. Like, oh, Woodson's out there, then that means they're going to throw to him. Well, they would put him out, and then they would throw to Ty Streets or somebody else. Oh, and then other times, he was the reason. And then, of course, there were special teams. And he was just an explosive player. And I was there for Desmond's, I can't do it very well, but,
I got Mitch Albom doing the Heisman on the show.
Well, that wasn't very good, was it? It's more like this, isn't it? Yeah. But I was there when he did that and have laughed with him over the years at that many times. I mean, to have the foresight to be able to do that when you're in the end zone. And, Woodson ended up with the Heisman as well, one of the rare defensive players to win a Heisman Trophy. So Beckman was right. I mean, there was a lot like that. And you kind of felt at that point, I think that made it 13-0.
Yeah, 13-0.
That they were going to win because the way that Michigan had held opponents, get 2 scores, you're almost you're almost locked in, and then they scored again, and it sort of felt like, well, it's over. Only it wasn't. There was a lot more of the game to be played.
For sure. And Michigan leads Ohio State 13-0 at halftime. When we come back to Road to the Victors, the Wolverines look to punch their ticket to Pasadena, and the stage is set for a wild and controversial end to the 1997 season. This is Road to the Victors, the story of the 1997 Michigan Wolverines. Welcome back to Road to the Victors. We are in the second half between Michigan and Ohio State. Down 13-0, Ohio State gets deep into Michigan territory, but who are they stopped by? Of course, it's Charles Woodson.
Jackson to throw, looking right. Now comes back, fires in the end zone, intercepted by Charles Woodson. Polish off the Heisman. Make room on the mantle. Charles Woodson took it away. An end zone interception.
Are you voting now at the New York Athletic Club?
I have been for years, Jimmy.
Well, Woodson that time, reads the pattern. Then he breaks underneath the route and makes a great pick in the end zone to stop an Ohio State drive.
As if things couldn't get worse, Stanley Jackson is picked off for the second time in a row in the second straight possession, this time by Andre Weathers, for a 34-yard interception return for a touchdown.
Michael Wiley in a tailback in the I formation. The Buckeyes at their 44. Jackson back to throw. Blitz coming from Sword. He eludes him. Now eludes another tackle at the 40. Gets rid of the ball. Intercepted by Weathers. He's back the other way. He's going to go. 10, 5. Touchdown, Michigan! Andre Weathers, 44 yards. 19-0. Wolverines.
Well, Stanley Jackson made a very, very bad decision. He was being rushed. Sam
Mitch, it's 20-0 Michigan. For all the buildup that this game had, it's number 2 versus number 4. It feels kind of anticlimactic in a way. You build this movie up, you're just like, oh my God, this is going to be a Titanic showdown. And halfway through, you're just like, that's it? Did you think that watching that game and that day, you're thinking to yourself, this Michigan team is destroying Ohio State. Like, Ohio State cannot move the football. Were you kind of astounded? I know we talked about Michigan's defense, but at the same time, this is an Ohio State team that's really, really good.
Well, I didn't feel that because if I remember correctly, Michigan wasn't doing anything offensively either. In fact, Ohio State was probably doing more offensively. They just made too many mistakes. But Michigan they were punting all the time. And I think they had 11 punts in that game. So you never felt like it was locked up because you kept saying to yourself, well, if Stanley Jackson doesn't throw another interception here, maybe Ohio State's going to come down and actually score something. And that proved to be the case. At the end of the third quarter, if I remember right, he threw a bomb. And all of a sudden, the air kind of went out of the stadium because it was 20-7 instead of 20-0. And they were like, "What? We didn't intercept that pass." That was actually a tie. I don't remember who he threw it to, but
I believe it was David Boston.
David Boston, yeah, good receiver,
Yeah.
and and a guy who had gotten into it with Charles Woodson at the beginning of the game, anyhow. So that was his little moment. So no, I personally, maybe the people in the stadium thought 20-0's a blowout, but I would have felt a lot better if Michigan could have run the ball better, or I mean, I don't even think they had 50 yards rushing in that game. And Greasy was throwing the ball, short passes and doing what he did, but not enough to score. In fact, if the final of that game was 20-14, 2 of those touchdowns were not offensive touchdowns, right? I think they scored one each category, one offensive, one defensive, and one special teams. So no, the answer to your question is you never feel like Ohio State is done. Maybe you feel it a little bit more when you're at Michigan Stadium because the crowd is there. If you take a lead on them down in Columbus, you never, ever, ever take your foot off the pedal. You never feel that that's done. But there was too much at stake, and they were too good a team. As you pointed out, they only had one loss. They were ranked number 4. And it was also that fear of being derailed from the thing that you want the most right when you're, just about to get it. I think that's the irony. I mean, irony is probably not the right word. That's the significance, I guess, and the weightiness of the Ohio State-Michigan game is so many times the whole year's campaign comes down to the outcome of that game, and like everything hangs on the line. Not one thing, not who's going to win the Michigan-Ohio State game. Everything. Are you going to win the Big Ten? Are you going to play for a national championship? Are you going to be ranked high enough to get invited to the right bowl game back then or to make the playoff? And the same thing's going to happen this year if everybody goes to chalk. It's going to be that same case again. You have everything coming into the game, as Michigan did in 1997. If they lose, they're out. They lose the Big Ten. They don't go to the Rose Bowl. They don't win the national championship. So when you have that much hanging on top of you, you don't ever think a game is over. You don't ever think like we got these guys done, because the specter of years where it didn't work out for the Wolverines was always there.
For sure. And as you said, Ohio State, they do get 2 scores. So now all of a sudden it's a 20-14 ball game. And Michigan's defense comes up big again as Glenn Steele sacks Ohio State's Joe Germain, forcing the Buckeyes to punt with just under 3 minutes left in the ball game. Brian Greasy nearly throws an interception, but the ball hits the ground. Ohio State forces the Wolverines to punt. The pressure for Ohio State now is they have to go 84 yards in just over 90 seconds. The question is, could they get it done? And Michigan's defense answers with an emphatic no.
Germain to throw, looking down the middle. He fires. tipped in the air, and it's intercepted by Sam Sword. They ruled he dropped it. It doesn't matter. Michigan takes over on downs with 42 seconds to play. Get the plane fueled for Pasadena.
Michigan beats Ohio State 20-14. The Wolverines are headed to the Rose Bowl for the first time since 1992. Mitch, from that moment, and you talked about the defense a little earlier. You made a point that this is one of the best defenses you've ever seen. In that game, all the pressure they faced all season, Glenn Steele, he comes up with the sack against Joe Germain. It seems like every single time, and throughout this series that I've been doing with these games, the defense came up big against Notre Dame. The defense came up big against Iowa after having really a terrible first half. And so you get to the Ohio State game. As you've watched this team all season long in 97, I know it's a long time ago, but you watch this team and do you come away with a new thing every week when you see a defense play that good and you're just like, how much better can they get? And then the next week they raise it another level.
Well, it's more like, to be honest with you, it's more like the opponent changing because, you saw the excellence from the very beginning. I mean, they beat a quality opponent in Colorado and held them to 3 points on the very first game of the year. So you were used to watching their excellence, but, as happens in the Big Ten, some weeks are you're playing a better team than others. So, when they beat Minnesota, that wasn't such a big deal. But, towards the end of the season, they played three good teams. They played Penn State, which was higher ranked than them, if I remember correctly, and beat them bad. It was like 34-8. And so now you say, wow, this is what they did to Penn State. They came back the next week and beat Wisconsin, who was also a pretty good team that year. Held them to 16 points. And then they come and they play Ohio State with all that stuff that hangs on the line. So it wasn't so much like, wow, there's something new every week from this defense. It's more like, are they going to be able to do what they did to the lesser teams when they have to play the great teams? And playing, number 3, number 24, and number 4 in the last 3 weeks of the season, and then going on to play Washington State, that was what was impressive in it. It's like they keep doing it against these really good football programs, which is how you measure it. Look, college football is always that. You can watch a college football game and see a team rack up 55 points in a game, and you go, oh my God, they're unstoppable. Every pass is. And if you really analyze the tape, you look at the defenders were 6 yards away from the guy who caught the pass, or there was no pressure on the quarterback, or the hole was a mile wide. And then they suddenly play a good team or a much better team, and he goes, where did it go? Where did it go? Where'd that offense go? How come the running back can't gain any yards? How come the receiver can't get open? Because they're playing a good defense. So that happens a lot in college football, the quality of opponents, especially with the early season stuff. And then, sometimes you're in a conference where there are some teams that are just historically bad, and these are easy games. So you really have to measure a defense against the quality of the opponent. It's not the NFL, where every team is capable of beating every team, on any given Sunday. That's not what college football is. And so I was impressed with what they did by who they were doing it against. And those last 4 games of the season for them, including the championship, the Rose Bowl, was really, really impressive performances by their defense.
For sure. And in the image of Charles Woodson, he has the rose in his mouth as fans pile onto the field. At that point, do you believe he had clinched the Heisman with the punt return, with everything that he had done up to that point? Were you thinking to yourself, okay, he's won the Heisman. This game, he had his, we call them today Heisman moments. He had his Heisman moment. He's going to win that trophy in 2 weeks in New York City.
You're asking me to remember a lot, how we felt back then. I mean, I don't think Peyton Manning was that year too, right? And I think there were a lot of us that felt that, and Ryan Leaf, who we would later see, in the Rose Bowl, who I remember writing about him like, oh, my God, some NFL team is going to love this guy. And that didn't work out so well.
Right.
But I think whenever you're up against quarterbacks of that level, you don't ever think the defensive guy is going to win it because they just don't. So it just goes to show you how special that year was in the eyes of, it's easy for us in Michigan. We all think the local kid should win the Heisman. But, when the national media and the national judges determined that his season was that great that he beat out Peyton Manning and Ryan Leaf and Randy Moss and some of those other guys. And I think I believed it when they announced his name, but I don't think I predicted it the week before.
Before Michigan and Charles Woodson could embrace the spoils of the regular season, they had to find out who their opponent in the Rose Bowl was going to be. Entering that Saturday, Washington State had not played in the Rose Bowl in 67 years. Now, all they needed to do was win the fabled Apple Cup and get a little help. Washington State needed a win, and either UCLA to beat USC or Arizona State to lose to Arizona. Thanks to the Bruins, who ironically enough play in the Rose Bowl, the Washington State Cougars punched their ticket to Pasadena with a 41-35 victory over the Washington Huskies. Meanwhile, over 2,900 miles away, the national championship took another significant turn. Leading 29-25 in the fourth quarter, the top-ranked Florida State Seminoles allowed the reigning national champion Florida Gators to drive 80 yards for a game-winning touchdown. In a game later called the greatest game ever played in the Swamp, Florida offered one more twist in the national title race, and a twist in the knife to their biggest rivals at the time. The Michigan Wolverines became number one in both polls, and it was just number one Michigan and Nebraska at number two as the lone remaining unbeatens in college football. However, tradition, a retiring coach, and a lot of controversy are just around the corner. Before we go, our guest has been Mitch Albom. Game audio has been provided by WJR and the Michigan Radio Network. Anjanette Delgado and Kirkland Crawford are the executive producers of this podcast. Robin Chan and Kerry Jr. II provide technical support. Peter Bhatia is the editor of the Detroit Free Press. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to Road to the Victors on Apple, Spotify, or your preferred streaming app of choice. And find us at freep.com/podcast. Please subscribe, leave a rating, and tell your friends about us. It really does help. For more information on the 1997 Michigan team, pre-order the book Hail Yes, the story of the 1997 Michigan Wolverines at freep.com. I'm Andrew Hammond, and we'll see you next week.
If you like what you heard and you enjoyed Road to the Victors, you can find them on freepress.com and wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't worry, if you're looking for more on-the-line content, we've got a special episode coming this Tuesday. See you then.